So, how did I almost get kicked out of a Best Buy just for listening to some Martin Logan speakers? Keep watching to find out. I recently found myself at the local Best Buy doing some recycling of old electronics, and I happened to notice that they had a pair of Martin Logan Impression 11A electrostatic hybrid speakers playing in their main showroom. And they were being powered by some very, very good electronics by Mark Levinson. If you've been watching this channel, you'll know as of lately I've been really obsessed with electrostatic speakers since getting these popori WR3s in about a month ago or so. And when I saw these Martin Logan electrostats, I'm like, wow, I really want to listen to these so I can kind of hear the difference of how Martin Logan electrostats do their thing versus how popori does their particular take on electrostats. Now, the Martin Logans are not full-range electrostats. They're, I think, about 350 hertz on up is electrostats, and the rest is a sealed woofer system. And these entry-level poporis go down to the 30s electrostatically. And one of the first things that I noticed was the bass in the Martin Logans really didn't integrate very well at all with the electrostatic panel. So, me being the crazy audiophile that I am, I immediately got behind the speakers and down on my knees and started looking at all the settings and switches. And little did I know that I had attracted the attention of Best Buy security. And I think they were kind of just hanging back, looking to see like what was going to happen. Like, is this guy trying to steal speaker cables? Is he trying to steal this whole speaker? What is going on? But while I was back there, I happened to notice that there were some switches for the mid-bass settings. And what I noticed is that the left speaker and the right speaker had two completely different settings for the mid-bass. And the other thing is that I noticed that the dials for the woofers were set almost at full volume. So what I did was I backed off the woofers completely. I really wanted to hear if I could get these woofers to integrate better with the electrostatic panel just by dialing back the amount of bass. And of course having the mid-bass settings equal on each speaker. So immediately when I came back to the listening position and started to listen, the security guard comes over and he's like, "Hey, what's going on here?" And I explained to him that I'm an audiophile, and I happened to notice that the speakers were not set to the same level of mid-bass. And so he completely relaxed, and I think they were still watching me anyway to see what was going on. So once I saw that the security was not actually going to kick me out, I went and opened up the media cabinet that the Mark Levinson integrated amplifier was sitting in, and of course I cranked this up. It wasn't outrageously loud, but I could definitely now hear much more of what these electrostatic speakers were doing. And all of a sudden, a track comes on that I knew well that I had in my own collection, which was Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody. And as soon as the opening note started, those vocals, I really keyed in. I'm like, hey, how are these particular electrostatic speakers portraying the vocals? And of course, vocals are one of the strong points of electrostatic speakers. So I was very, very keen to hear how Martin Logan, their Impression 11A speakers, handles the vocals. And then, of course, the rest of the song kicks in, and I paid very, very close attention to what that sounded like, how it handled bass and treble and different instruments. And I felt like they gave a pretty decent impression of what they would sound like set up in a fairly large room, sort of like this room that I'm in right now, and took a lot of mental notes of exactly what it sounded like. And I bicycled home, and in about 20 or 25 minutes later, I put on the same track, Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody. And wow, from the very first vocals that start off, there was a massive, massive difference. I'm not saying that the Martin Logans were bad, but they just sounded rather small and miniature, and they just sounded like, decent speakers, nothing to write home about. But wow, when I heard that same track here, it was like going to Technicolor. Each voice really occupied its own space. It had tremendous bandwidth. It wasn't just like a small voice coming from a speaker. It sounded much, much fuller, like you would actually hear in real life. You're not just hearing the sounds coming out of the mouth, but you're hearing the chest. Instruments and vocals in real life actually have quite a bit of bandwidth, meaning that they're not just in a very narrow frequency, but they're actually producing a lot of different frequencies. If it's recorded that way, very often the recording is kind of rolled off, and what they do is they carve a sonic spectrum for each instrument so it kind of cuts through the mix. So there isn't always a lot of bandwidth to certain instruments and voices in recordings, but of course better recordings I find have a lot more bandwidth to each individual instrument, and they produce a lot more of the frequencies of that instrument or voice that you'd hear in real life. And so I thought it was a very, very interesting experience to hear what Martin Logan electrostats sound like compared with how Popori is doing their electrostats. And of course, this is a difference between sort of like a David and Goliath. Of course, Martin Logan is just a massive, massive company sold in thousands and thousands of places. And Popori is fairly new to the US market, and I believe only sold in a few different places. So it was a very, very interesting day getting to hear what Martin Logan sounds like versus Popori. Now, there is a price difference. The Martin Logans, I believe, were about $12,000, and these WR3s are closer to about $18,000 to $19,000. The price varies depending upon finish, and also, I believe, the tariffs. Martin Logans are made in the US, so I don't believe you're paying tariffs, but there are companies like PS Audio, for example, that does make their products in the US. However, they have to source parts from overseas, and as a matter of fact, their new line of PMG electronics has gone up $500 each just because of the additional costs of them sourcing parts from overseas. So it's not as if buying American components is completely free of tariffs. So I'll drop another video soon describing some of the differences I hear with specific songs on the Popori WR3 electrostatics versus my TAD CR1 point source box speakers. So if you enjoy this kind of content, please consider hitting the subscribe button and join me on my journey with these electrostatic speakers and a lot of other high-end audio products I'm going to be doing videos on in the near future. Thanks for watching.